What's up, everybody? Nick Dwyer back with you for another episode of the 10th inning. The 2010s are coming to an end. The 2020s are right around the corner. So, obviously, it's time that we make teams of the decade in the MLB, the NHL, the NBA, and the NFL. In this episode, I will be giving you my MLB all-decade team of the 2010s. Now, for this list, I will be having a 14-man roster. Okay, I know that sounds really weird. Why just a 14-man roster? I'll have 9 starting position players, including a DH, 3 starting pitchers, and then finally 2 bullpen arms to go along with that. So, now, before I get into it, when I get to my outfield, the criteria there may be a little bit different. And you might be wondering why I chose some players and why I didn't choose certain players. I'll explain my criteria chosen before I get to the outfield. So, without further ado, let's get it started. In my starting lineup, at catcher, I have Yadier Molina. Now, this might be a little controversial because this decade really came down to 2 catchers, Buster Posey and Yadier Molina. And it really all depends. Which one do you like more? I went with the defensive master. Now, if Buster Posey stayed healthy throughout the whole decade, there's a very good chance that I would have chose him. But luck has it that he wasn't able to stay healthy. We all know that brutal injury that happened to him. So he wasn't able to stay healthy. But he was slightly better, and I always say slightly because in his prime seasons, much better offensively than Yadier Molina, but only slightly better overall than Yadier Molina offensively. But Yadier Molina defensively takes the cake. It all depends what you like. When I make my all-time teams, all-decade teams, whatever it may be, I tend to go, okay, now I'm going to make a lineup with these players. How am I going to do it? I'll take Yadier Molina all day. I need that defensive presence in my lineup. Now, Yadier Molina, for the decade, not bad. 287 average, 336 on base percentage, 424 slugging, 121 home runs. And second during the decade for catchers and hits with 1,367 and 2,016 total bases. Plus, he won a ring. Big part of winning a ring. I can't go against Yadier Molina. If he's going to be my backstop option between him and Buster Posey, it's a toss-up offensively in his prime, obviously Buster Posey, but defensively, no question, I want Yadier Molina. Molina is my guy right here. Going to first base, this was really one of the easier choices. There were 3 players who could potentially have gotten it in Miguel Cabrera, Joey Votto, and Paul Goldschmidt. But when you really look at it, Goldschmidt sits at a very easy third in those 3 options. So it really comes down to Joey Votto and Miguel Cabrera. As great as Joey Votto was and has been, Miguel Cabrera gets this one. Miguel Cabrera won a triple crown during the decade, 2 MVPs. You can't go against Miguel Cabrera here. 317 average, 399 on base percentage, 544 slugging with 268 home runs during the decade. You just can't go against Cabrera here. Joey Votto, though, not a bad option whatsoever. Joey Votto might be one of the more, maybe most underappreciated players in the decade, unless you're a Cincinnati Reds fan. Joey Votto always seemed to get overlooked, which never really made sense. Always an on-base machine. 428 on-base percentage over the decade. First in the whole MLB. This guy was just crazy good at getting on base. The biggest problem with Votto compared to Cabrera was he just never drove in as many RBIs. Cabrera was an RBI machine, so that is why I'm giving my edge to Cabrera. Goldschmidt and Votto, both great players in the decade. No question about that. But Cabrera gets this edge. Miguel Cabrera is the first baseman for the decade. Now we move over to second base. Second base, again, kind of like catcher, really comes down to 2 positions. 2 players, sorry. Jose Altuve and Robinson Cano. Robinson Cano, started the decade off great with the New York Yankees. By the middle of it, kind of slid, and now he is a shell of himself. Jose Altuve, on the other hand, came in a little bit later during the decade. Came in 2012, but he really heated up, really came alive. Jose Altuve just became an animal. And again, this is kind of a position. What do you like? Do you want a sweet, swinging lefty bat who can play good defense for you? Well, go with Robinson Cano. But if you want someone who can get on base, a speedster, Jose Altuve. Over the decade, Jose Altuve, 315 average, 364 on base percentage, 463 slugging with 128 home runs. There's no wrong choice here, just like Kesher. There's no wrong choice here. But Jose Altuve, to me, gets a little bit of an edge over Robinson Cano just because Altuve has had a more productive decade. If Cano was able to keep up what he was doing for 2 or 3 more seasons at the beginning of the decade, he'd probably be my choice, but he wasn't. Altuve won an MVP in 2017, won a World Series. Big part of that World Series win. You just can't go against Jose Altuve here. That's who I'm going with for my second baseman. Shortstop. Shortstop is an interesting position because there really wasn't a great shortstop throughout the entire decade. So therefore, I'm going with the Indian shortstop Francisco Lindor. Now, Lindor came in a little later than most of the players on this list, but again, no real good option at shortstop other than him. You have Andrelton Simmons, Elvis Andrus, and Troy Tulowitzki. Now, just by hearing the name, you probably think, well, Troy Tulowitzki easily should have gotten this. But he really only had 2, maybe 3 good years. Francisco Lindor, really, ever since his second year in the league, has been an animal. He deserves to be on this list. Switch hitting bat in the lineup. Great for whatever you need. Plays fantastic defense. Lindor is my shortstop for the team. Now at third base I think is another position. It really comes down to 2 players. You got Nolan Arenado and Adrian Beltre. Now, yeah, it seems like Adrian Beltre retired so long ago, but he really didn't. Adrian Beltre is my pick that I'm going with here. In the decade, 307 average, 358 on base percentage, 514 slugging with 227 home runs. Now, the crazy thing about Beltre is he seemed like he aged like a fine wine. He got better as he got older. This decade put Beltre into the Hall of Fame. No question about it. Beltre seemed like this was his best hitting decade, his best fielding decade. He just did everything that you wanted of him. Turned into a complete animal. Beltre deserves a spot on this list. Now, Arenado, kind of like Lindor, didn't get a chance to play the whole decade, so we never really know. And Arenado's truly come alive in the later part of the decade. Always been a great defensive player. And it took until his 3rd season to really get going offensively. So if he played a little bit longer in the decade, who knows? He easily could be the 3rd baseman. But Adrian Beltre, man, the future Hall of Famer, possibly his best decade in the league. You gotta go with him. Adrian Beltre as my 3rd baseman. Alright, so we've reached the outfield. I told you I was going to kind of break down my criteria here, because I'll just let you know now. One name that is omitted from the outfield, Andrew McCutchen. Now, how do you omit Andrew McCutchen? McCutchen was one of the best outfielders in the early part of the decade. Well, I didn't want to go strictly outfielders because I could have made it just all outfielders that were the best. No, I wanted to go with a left fielder, a center fielder, and a right fielder. Therefore, you have to play primary left field for the decade, primary center field, or primary right field. And as good as McCutchen was, and we'll get to it when we get to center field, I think we all know who center field's going to be. So, that's why McCutchen will not be in this outfield list, even though he 100% deserves a spot on the all-decade team. If I was making a larger roster, of course he would make it. But that's why he's not making it in this video. So at left field, I'm starting off with Michael Brantley. Now, Michael Brantley, kind of an interesting choice I'm going with right here. Why? Well, it's kind of simple. Before his injury started happening, he was one of the best left fielders in the league. Finished third in the 2014 American League MVP voting. He was on his way up. He was only getting better. Then injuries started to occur. Kind of put him back down. However, Brantley, for the past 2 seasons, has looked really good. In Houston, he kind of looked like he reinvented himself, becoming a very good player once again over the decade. 296 average, 354 on base percentage, 441 slugging, 109 home runs. Michael Brantley might not be the best player in the world, but he deserves a spot on this list. And this was over a player who probably, I feel like a lot of players would choose if they had to pick a strictly left fielder, and that's Ryan Braun. Now, Ryan Braun, other than the PED scandal, which I'm not going into here, I didn't want him because Braun, best hitter at left field, no question. But that's all he's going to give you. Michael Brantley, he's not great at one aspect, but he's really good at a lot of aspects. He's a good contact hitter, can have some pop in the bat for extra base hits, good fielder, not really a great arm, not really great speed, but Braun will give you one thing, that's power. Brantley, he can do multiple things. That's why I'm going with Brantley. Again, this goes, who do you like? Do you want the guy who can do everything, not great but good? Or do you want the guy who's great at one thing and then not good at the other? I went with Brantley here, so Brantley is my left fielder. Now we go into center field. Again, Andrew McCutchen, not my center fielder. This is the easiest choice out of everything. Mike Trout. I mean, can you go against Mike Trout here? Mike Trout's on pace to be one of the greatest players in MLB history. You can't go against Mike Trout here. 305 average, 419 on base percentage, 581 slugging, 285 home runs over the decade, 3 MVPs, and the really interesting thing about Trout is every year since he's been in the league, he has not fallen below 5th place for MVP voting. You can't go against Mike Trout here. There's literally no argument. It doesn't matter if you like the guy, if you don't like the guy as a player. He is by far the best player of the decade, not just center fielder, so he had to make this list as a center fielder. Moving to right field, I have Giancarlo Stanton, strictly for the reason he played longer and was a little more consistent over the playing time than Mookie Betts. Mookie Betts came on, has had a good time in the MLB, but he came in 2014, so he hasn't had as much time. Stanton had already had 5 seasons up to that point. So it's a little tough to go with Mookie Betts over Stanton because Stanton, one of the best power hitters in the league since he came in. 268 average, 358 on base percentage, 547 slugging, 308 home runs over the course of the decade. Stanton hasn't been as good defensively lately. Now he's a left fielder with Aaron Judge in New York, but in Miami, he was a right fielder. Very good right fielder. Nothing special in the field, but with the bat, oh man, he was special. Now, other names I could have included in right field. Jose Bautista, one of the best hitters in the decade, but he got older as the decade went, obviously, and his production was slipping, so I couldn't go with him. Mookie Betts, he's on the up and up, is potentially the best right fielder in the league right now. He just hasn't played long enough, so I couldn't go with him. And then Bryce Harper, the cover boy for the MLB right now, possibly the most popular guy or most recognizable guy in the league. If it was based off one season to make this team, Bryce Harper is on this team, no question about it. 2015, his MVP season, one of the best MVP seasons we've ever seen. But it's for a whole decade. He just hasn't been able to do that ever again. And to put it frankly, he's been an average right fielder. other than that season where he just played great. Above average hitter, average right fielder. So I just can't put him there. Giancarlo Stanton gets the right fielder for my nod. Now we go to DH. A lot of great DHs over the course of the decade. You have David Ortiz, who played a little bit for the Red Sox. Obviously not the whole decade. You have Edwin Encarnacion, who can play a little first base, but let's be honest, he's a DH. But then you have the player I'm going with, Nelson Cruz. Nelson Cruz, over the course of the decade, 281 average, 350 on base, 538 slugging, 346 home runs. Now, Nelson Cruz, he started off the decade as a right fielder. But why I picked him was because as he moved to a full-time DH, his numbers got better. His hitting numbers got better, which is what you would expect of someone who doesn't have to worry about the field. But he's also 38. Remember that. Cruz, it's hard to go against any of the choices here, but Cruz is my choice because he will hit the long ball for you. He can drive runs in when he needs to. You can't go wrong with Nelson Cruz. So it's a right-handed heavy lineup, but I think it's worth it. So those are my position players. Now we get into the starters. These three starters, I think, sat above everybody else during the decade. It's hard to go against them. At number one, Clayton Kershaw. Kershaw was the best pitcher in the decade. You can't go against that argument. If you want to add playoffs, okay, maybe he wasn't, but we're not adding playoffs. Kershaw was the best pitcher during the decade. 156 and 61, 2.31 ERA, 2,179 strikeouts over the decade. You just can't ask for a better lefty. Now, what it kind of looked like was when he was in his prime. Now, I know I obviously never watched him play, so it might not be close at all. But what it reminded me of was just how dominant he was. Over his prime 5 or 6 seasons, he looked like he was Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax was the best pitcher in the whole MLB over his 6 seasons of dominance. That's what Clayton Kershaw was. Another lefty. You can't make an argument why he shouldn't be on this team. Clayton Kershaw is my number one pitcher. And he won 3 Cy Youngs, 1 MVP over the decade, and he had a pitching triple crown with a 2.28 ERA, 21 wins, and 248 strikeouts in 2011. So, Kershaw gets the nod as my number one. Going to the number 2 pitcher, we have another one who was a triple crown winner in 2011, Justin Verlander. 160, 86, 3.10 ERA, 2,260 strikeouts in the decade. Now, based off the one season, 2011, maybe Verlander would have found a spot, but he reinvented himself. He found himself once again once he went to Houston. In Houston, Verlander's 42 and 15, 2.45 ERA, 633 strikeouts in 2.5 seasons. Verlander deserves a spot on this list. MVP winner, 2-time Cy Young Award winner. Nothing else to say. Finally, we have one of Verlander's teammates in Detroit with him, Matt Scherzer. Matt Scherzer, he had a rough 2 seasons to start off his career, but then in 2010, it seemed like he really found everything. Had a decent couple of seasons. Then in 2013, Scherzer won the first of his 3 Cy Young Awards. 21 and 3, 2.9 ERA, 240 strikeouts. I mean, Matt Scherzer, strikeout machine. 161, 74, 3.12 ERA, 2,452 strikeouts over the decade. Now, some notable omissions from the list for pitchers. Madison Bumgarner, very good postseason pitcher, just couldn't put him in here. Felix Hernandez, great at the start of the decade, fell off by the end of the decade. Chris Sale, one of the best pitchers in the league, but other than like 2 or 3 seasons where he stood above the rest, just been a top pitcher, never the top pitcher. Corey Kluber, another one, kind of like Chris Sale, other than 1 or 2 top seasons, never really been the top pitcher. And then Jacob deGrom. deGrom, the past couple of seasons, best pitcher, but I can't find a reason to put him over any of these three guys. So you have Kershaw, Verlander, and Scherzer. Now we get into the two relief pitchers. One closer, one setup guy. I'm starting with the closer, Craig Kimbrel. Simple as that. Kimbrel was the best reliever, best closer of the decade. You can't say anything. When he was in Atlanta, he was a scary guy to face. Whether it came from the heat of his fastball or how he started on the mound, Craig Kimbrel is the guy. 346 saves, 2.08 ERA, 898 strikeouts. He was an all-time great in Atlanta, so he's on this team easily. Then, the last relief pitcher, setup man for Kimbrel, Andrew Miller. At his prime, Andrew Miller was one of the most feared pitchers to face out of the bullpen, and it made sense. Tall lefty, odd delivery. What's not to fear? After a failed stint as a starter, Boston moved Miller to a relief pitcher, and Miller never looked back. Great player. Teams who were looking to make the World Series traded for Miller to make that extra push, and Miller was an integral part of all the playoff runs he made. 59 saves, 3.11 ERA, 713 strikeouts in the decade, primarily used as a setup man. That's what he would be on this team. So, there you have it. That's my all-decade team. Sorry if this video was a little bit longer than all the others. I wanted to give some good reasoning why I chose players. So, again, it might be a little longer. Sorry about that. But down in the comment section, let me know what you liked about this roster, what changes you would make to this roster, because everyone has their own different roster. There's no one right answer for rosters, so it'll all be different. Just let me know down in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the 10th Inning if you want more videos like this. For the 10th Inning, Nico Dwyer. See ya.